Hi, welcome back. My name is Srikanth. In this new series of sessions, we're going to learn application designer scripting in Analytics Cloud. This series is good for beginners who wanted to get started with scripting basics. In this first session, we're going to look at some simple examples of scripting in SAC Designer. The example scripts I'm using in these sessions are maintained in my local Visual Studio Code editor. Also, I'm pushing this code to my public GitHub repository. So you can access my public GitHub repository and download these files for your own reference. I'm going to provide my GitHub repository link as an attachment to this video session as well. Well, I'm going back to the content. In this first session, we're going to look at some very simple examples of scripting. Before starting with the workshop, let's start with the introduction. So in this picture, we can see the positioning of Analytics Cloud Designer. SAP is offering two application design scripting offerings. They are Lumira Designer, formerly known as Design Studio, and Analytics Cloud Application Designer. Lumira Designer is being a solution for on-premise custom design applications, and on cloud, Analytics Cloud is providing scripting capabilities. But all the future innovations are going to be more on SAP Analytics Cloud Designer. With that, let's take a look at the use cases for application designer in SAC. The general three main areas of Analytics Cloud are business intelligence, planning, and predictive scenarios. In the past, we have already seen these scenarios using SAC story creation. Now we're going to look at these three scenarios from Analytics Application Designer perspective. In this series, I'm going to cover business intelligence as well as planning. So I'm going to start with business intelligence scenario, and I will start with some basic simple scripting capabilities which are needed for BI reporting. And then later in the next part of these sessions, we're going to cover planning's related application designer scripting as well. Also wanted to touch base some of the frequently asked questions on SAC application designer. First of all, why do we need an application design when there are stories available? Well, stories are good for a lot of visualizations and components availability, but they lack custom scripting. So if you wanted to customize a widget or component to perform some customizing action, you cannot do that with SAC story. And also if you wanted to have a custom widget development, you cannot have one. You can do those things by using application designer in SAC. The other question I always have is about what is a scripting language? It's a subset of JavaScript. You also can use CSS for custom styling. So you can consider that scripting language isn't changed from Lumira Designer to Analytics Cloud Designer. It's the same standard. And the other question we always frequently see, can I migrate Design Studio code into Analytics Designer applications? The direct answer is no at this time. There's no direct migration process to migrate your existing Design Studio or Lumira Designer applications to SAC Analytics Designer applications. There are several reasons for that. As I said, the code line is not same for Lumira Designer and Analytics Cloud Designer. They are different code lines, and you cannot import application custom SDKs which were previously developed in Lumira Designer into Analytics Designer of SAC. So with all the little introduction, now we go on to system. I'm going to access SAC trial system. I've given steps to set up your trial instance. It's going to come for 30 days and you can extend this instance up to 90 days. Once you got your system set up, and the next thing is to have data sources. You can have data sources as models. You can create a flat file import to get the data into the model, or you can connect to live data model as well. Initially, we start with flat file imported data into a model, and then later we also look at SAC live data model connection to HANA and do the application designer in that scenario as well. I'm going to access as application designer now. Let me log on to Analytics Cloud. I already logged on to Analytics Cloud application and I'm in my files. I'm going to access menu and then say create, say Analytics application. I'm creating a new application and you can see the canvas and also scripting. And I can insert several components or widgets into my canvas and then adjust the scripting to those components to perform what are the customizations I wanted to do. In the scripting, we got script variables, can declare a variable which can be used globally in the application. And we also can create a script objects which can be used as functions and they can be called even without having a on-click or any of the existing standard events. And there are more scripting features given in here, but we will understand them in the next series of sessions. Well, that is about the layout and the interface, about the canvas and scripting. Now let's go and start with the first example what we have for this session. In this example, it is to have a simple button to control the visibility of a component. So I'm going to insert a table and also a chart, and then with a button, we're going to control the visibility of either a chart or the table. Go back to Analytics Cloud Designer. I'm going to insert a table first. Click on table, an existing model. I'm going to choose an existing model here. I already have a model created as part of file import. Choose that. And then it's going to come here. And I'm going to drag a little down here. And then I'm going to have a row. Choose the dimension, choosing country. And also going to adjust a column here. So in the columns, I'm going to choose, I'm going to remove the filters first. I don't need any filters. I'm going to choose a column here. I'll remove the existing column filter and then choose order value as the column to be in my table. So just one dimension and one measure in this table. I'm going to do the same thing for inserting a chart as well. I'm going to switch off the designer and then go back to my components and insert a chart and drag it onto to the canvas. Now my chart is here. I'm going to control the behavior of the chart. This is going to be adding a measure to this chart. It is going to be again order value, and then dimension is going to be country, the same as the table does. Okay, now I have two components. I'm going to take it off and then just keep these two components side by side. So I got these two components here. I'm not doing any formatting. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to insert a button right on top of these two. And then that button, when I click on that button, it has to control to display either the table or the chart. So I'm going to say insert a new component called button. And the button is appearing here. I'm just going to take that button to the top. Just this formatting, I just adjust it so that it fits in properly. Okay, the button code, so as soon as you add a component here, it is coming in Canvas as well. So we've got a chart named as chart 1 and then table 1 are the names for those components, and button has got _1 as well. So you also see the function which is going to invoke on-click event for that button. So with that on-click event, we're going to say to the system that this is the function has to be triggered when this particular button is clicked. Okay, we're going to click on on-click event for the button, and it opens a function for us for that particular component, and then we're going to write the script here. The good thing here is you got a code completion is going to propose all the existing APIs so that you can select them from the drop-down list and you can use it for your coding. So I'm going to press Control space for that, and then it gets me the drop-down list. What I'm going to do, I'm going to control the table 1 component. So I'm going to type in table 1. It's get to the table 1 component, and then I can do this. I can do the dot, and then again press the code completion, and it is going to give me some more APIs which are possible for the table 1. So I'm going to select set visible property, and that is going to set the visibility either to true or false. So for this button, when I click on this button, my table has to be displayed and the chart has to be hidden. So I'm going to say true, and then end this statement with semicolon. Similarly, I need to control the behavior for the chart as well. So I'm going to put the code completion and then type in chart 1, press enter, and do the code completion again for set visible API. And then this time I'm going to keep false. And that's it. When I click on this button, it's going to make that table to be visible and then the chart to be displayed as hidden. Okay, I'm going to save this one. I'll be keeping this in my Analytics Designer folder. So I'm going to call this as session 1. Say OK. It's saved. Now I can run that application and see the output. So far we've been working on design time of Analytics Designer. We're going to look at the runtime behavior of this application. So I'm going back to Canvas and see the design time again. So I didn't name this button text, but you can say switch to table and then say run application. It's a little slow on running the application on the client. So you got a button here and you also have a table and a chart. So when I click on button, it's going to hide the chart and only displays the table. Well, that's how simple it is to have a script for any specific component in Analytics Designer. In continuation to that, you can also create another button and do the other way around. Like you can make the chart visible to true and then make the table visible as false. So it does the opposite thing. So you can, when you click on that button, it is going to display the chart and hide the table. You can do that later. The next example I'm going to do is working with the data. When we're working with the data, there are more examples and more complex scenarios we're going to see in the next few sessions. We're going to start with very basic scenario of filtering the data on a dimension. One thing we just make a note here is that currently at Analytics Cloud Designer, we always access the data source through widgets like charts and tables, not as a standalone data source. Where we, in Design Studio or Lumira Designer, we have the option to control data source directly, and we can bind that data source to any component directly. But in Analytics Cloud Designer, this feature isn't available yet. So we're going to access the data source through any specific component. In our case, we're going to access the data source through a table widget for this particular example. And then we're going to apply a button to a filter on that particular dimension what we're going to choose. Let's do that in the system. So I'm going back to my code editor. You can see that this is recorded as example 2. And this is a very simple API call we're going to use for on the table. Okay, I'm going to insert another button there. I'm going to call that as, I'm going to insert that button I'm going to drag this to here, and this button, to avoid confusions, I'm going to change the text for these buttons. So when I click on that, any specific component, I can invoke a designer. And also I can see the styling here. I'm going to change the text to it. This is a table display, and that's for the filter country. That's it. Now I've got the separation of those buttons. I'm going to remove the designer panel. Now I'm going to write an on-click event for button 2. It's just going to be function on-click. Again, I'm going to do the code completion. So my objective is to apply a filter on table 1. So I'm going to choose table 1 and then dot. And again, open the code completion and then say this time I'm going to get the data source, get data source, and then code completion. And then I'm going to say set dimension filter. That is another API what I'm going to use to apply a filter on dimension. So you can type in set dimension, a filter, and then you're going to pass the parameters to this API. So you get the help for passing the parameters. What are the parameters you're going to pass? So I'm going to apply a filter on country dimension. So I'm going to give the code completion again. So to see all the available dimensions, I got country here. I'm going to choose what member. I'm going to hard code for this particular instance. I wanted to filter the data on Canada. And then end the statement with semicolon. That's it. I'm going to save that and then run my application. So I got two buttons here, and then this button is for the filtering my table on specific country. So I'm going to say filter country, and then it is filtered to Canada. You can also apply the cascading filters to all the other components in the application, but we're not there yet. We are starting with very basic, simple scripts to understand and familiar with these components in this first session. Well, that's good. Let's go to the next example in my list. This is going to be filter lane. So what we had, it's like a page filter in SAC story. If you're familiar with SAC stories, so you got page filter and widget filters and etc. So you can apply a filter on an entire page or multiple pages. The similar functionality in Designer is achieved through filter lane. So we're going to take a look at that filter lane component now. And by using this filter lane component, we can apply filter on a certain dimension. And then we're going to remove that filter using a script. For that, I'm going to add a new button and then apply a script to remove that filter from the table. Let's take a look at that in the system. I'm going to access my Analytics Cloud. This time I'm going to add a new component called filter line, sorry. And I'm just clicking on that filter line, and then it comes on the top. So what you're going to say, I don't need this the entire space for filter line, so I'm going to adjust the space to this one. I also say I'm going to configure this filter line first. Say edit styling. It comes to the designer, and then you can adjust the designer. You can apply this to a particular widget, or you can apply this to entire application. So I'm going to go with applying individual widget filter. So for that, I'm choosing individual widget filter, and then source object is going to be a table. So whatever the filters applied using this filter line component are going to be applied only on the table. Let's do that. That's it. I'm going to switch off my designer. Once the filter is applied, I wanted to clear that filter. So for that, I'm going to insert another button from my components and then say button. So I'm going to drag this button to buttons list, and I adjust this button text from the designer. I'm going to name this as remove filter, and then off the designer, and I'm going to invoke onClick event for button 3. And here again I'm going to invoke code completion to get my table 1 as the data source, and code completion again to get get data source API, then press enter, and then this time I'm going to get the remove dimension filter. Got the remove dimension filter, and I wanted to give the dimension name. I can directly type in, or I can choose from the existing dimensions by pressing control space again. I'm going to end that with semicolon. So this is that. Just this API is going to call when this button clicked, and then it's going to remove the dimension filter on the table. So I'm going to save this and run that application. Don't worry about formatting. I really wasn't paying any attention on the formatting. This is just to explain the scripting for in the basic example. So this is the filter line. So what I can do, I can choose the filter on the data source. I'm going to choose on the country dimension. So I'm going to keep Australia and then say OK. As now the table is filtered to this particular country data. Now we're going to click on remove filter, and then it removed the applied filter on that table component and it displays everything. So you can use that particular API to remove the filter on existing data set. So with that we can apply the filters, we can remove the filters, and we can postpone the filter execution to the certain level by keeping all the filters selected by users and apply the filter at one time. We can do a lot of customization based on this filter APIs. So we've been talking about APIs multiple times. So you wanted to get all the list of APIs. I'm attaching a link here. So that's going to be very useful when you're working in the designer. The API link is going to be just here. So you can access this particular API reference link and then bookmark it. This is going to come very handy for you. So this is the search text. For example, you want to get the dimension filter, you could just dimension, and then it gives you the list of all possible APIs for the dimension. For example, remove dimension filter is what we just used. It gets the syntax and this the data type for that particular parameters and everything to get a quick help. You also have set dimension filter. There are many more. Okay, now I'm going to go to the next example in my list. It's going to be example 4, having a drop-down box filter. There's one thing we have to note here is that unlike Lumira Designer or Design Studio, we cannot bind a data source to a drop-down box or list box directly. So what we used to do in the past, we got a data source, could be a live model or any imported model. We can have that data source bind to a specific component so that it gets the data from any of those dimensions from that model. It's not a very straightforward process in Analytics Cloud right now. So at this moment, so we're going to do that manual loading to populate the data to the drop-down box, just because the data source binding is not available right now. So we're going to see how we're going to do that in the system now. I'm accessing my Analytics Cloud application, and then this time I'm going to insert a new component called, first I'm going to go to the canvas. I'm going to go and insert a drop-down. box. It's going to come here. I'm going to just move this to this way. And I can also insert a text if I want it. Just as okay, I understand that this is going to be used for a filtering a dimension. Okay, what if you wanted to add a text, you can add. So this is easy. So just add text, and then that's going to come just before that. You can provide the text to it. I just little adjust these two components. So I'm going to say country, and then I just switch off the designer and go to this drop-down box. I wanted to fill the data for this drop-down box. So I cannot directly bind the data source to this drop-down box. What I can do, I can invoke an initialization function so that it is called when this particular application is invoked or executed. So how do I do that? I go to the canvas page, and then I can see a function here, edit scripts. I'm going to call on initialization. We used to have this in Designer or Lumira Designer as well. So again, the on initialization script is going to get executed at the first. What I can do, I can write a small script to read the data from the data source, and then get all the members of that particular dimension, and then add them to the drop-down box as a list. So let's go and grab the script from my, you can do that by code completion and just do it. I just speed up that process. I'm going to access my drop-down example 04. Is going to be a simple script. Just going to explain what I'm doing here. So this is going to be, I'm declaring a variable. This is local variable, just that I'm calling it as a drop-down country. And then what I'm passing to this variable, table 1, that's my table, and get data source, and then also get members from the data source for the country dimension. So you're going to get all the members of that country. Once I have that list in the variable, it's kind of an array variable. I'm going to loop that variable for all the members and then add them to dropdown. This is an API for adding the items to dropdown. So similarly for list box, you can have this API listbox dot add item, and then you provide the source for that add item API. In my case, my source is the variable, what I just declared above. And every time it's going to insert one record, one country to the dropdown. So it is going to loop until the end of all country records from the dimension. This is what the code is doing here. I'm going to save that. And when the script is initialized, when the application is initialized, and it's going to run and get the list to the drop-down box. So you see that in the drop-down box. And what next? So once you have them in the drop-down box, I wanted to select one or two countries, and then my table has to filter automatically based on the selection. So so what I could do, I can go to the on-click event of drop-down box, and then I write an API which can filter the table data based on the selected member from drop-down box. So I can write that. So the object is going to be table 1, because that's what so sometimes you don't get the proper naming. It's better always to do the code completion and then do that table 1 component and then get data source and then set dimension filter. And this time it's not hard-coded. It is going to be a value from selected list from the drop-down box. So in order to get that, so I can first get that selected value into a variable, and then I can pass that variable to this API. So just to speed up that process to get that API, I'm going to grab that from my code completion. I'm going to get that code, paste it. So I'm declaring a variable called select a value, and this particular value is taken from drop-down component, and then this is the API what I'm going to use, selected key. So you can get that API by doing the code completion. So you see that it is selected key. That's what I've taken. So I'm going to remove that. So that's it. So my selected key value is in this particular variable. So I'm going to pass this variable to my country dimension. So for that, I'm going to say country dimension, and the value is going to be selected value. Previously, last example, I've used a hard-coded value, but this time I'm using a variable which is taken from a drop-down box, and then save it. And that's it. Now I'm going to run my application. Okay, now I see a drop-down box, and I click on that. I can see the list of all the countries from the dimension. So I'm going to click on Canada, and as soon as and a member is selected in the drop-down box, my table component is filtered to that particular dimension member. So that's how you can interact with several components like radio button, list box, drop-down box, and etc. Okay, well, we're going to go to the next example in my list for this session. So that's going to be sending some warning or error message to users when they are running certain actions. So I'm going to invoke a button, and this button is going to just say, give a warning to the user saying, oh, you're performing certain action which isn't supposed to be done. Sometimes, especially when you're doing planning, we will cover in the next sessions about planning input scenarios and etc. You may not be eligible or may not allowed to do certain actions. So you get to send some errors and successful or warning messages based on the user's action. So we're going to see a basic look at a simple API to perform that message. What I will do, I'll go to my application. You can see all these different tabs here. I'm going to close them. You can have multiple tabs for each on-click event to maintain or to control each component at any point in time. So I'm going to insert another button, and then that button is going to have on-click event to send a message to or to give a message to user. So I'll say a button. It's going to come here, and then this button I'm going to say I'm going to invoke a designer and then give that name text as application message and of the designer. I'm going to invoke that button for on-click event here. I'm going to say you can invoke code completion saying application dot, and then you can say application dot and then show message. That's just what I got. And then in this, I got a several, you got a info for the parameters. So you can say message type. So I'm going to say message type as application message type warning. And then I'm going to say that message in quotes as a string. So I'm going to say invalid action. So and that particular API call with semicolon and just save it. So when this particular button is clicked, you're going to get this message in the application saying there isn't any a wrong thing in this application, but just providing a message to the application. So click on that application, you get an invalid action message from the application pop-up. Okay, lastly, I wanted to just give a simple example to CSS as well, cascading style sheet. So I'm going to access my designer again. This time, as we already talked about, we have seen the CSS in the past to apply color, background, borders, and etc. It's not that you cannot do graphically. Yes, you have the option to do that graphically here. For example, for the latest button I have application message. So if you invoke the designer, you got the styling here. You can apply size and position and widget coloring and etc. here, which is all good. What I wanted to control or override this behavior by writing my own CSS. So I can do so and then apply that particular CSS class to all the components in my analytics designer. So I can do that so by invoking a CSS. You can see that the paintbrush on the canvas, edit CSS. And then in the edit CSS, you can see all the components and then the possible parameters for each component as well. For example, I'm doing it for a button. So I'm going to select a button here. And then these are the different things I can do with a CSS class, background color, border, and etc. So I'm going to write a simple simple CSS class for overriding the behavior of a button. And then that particular class I'm going to assign to one or two button widgets. So I'm going to call this class as my button CSS, and then it's going to be SAP. I'm going to grab that from my sheets, and then within brackets you're going to say what is going to be the property. So you got the properties listed when you press the code completion and say the background color. So I wanted to give this background color as green and then just end with semicolon and save it and then run that application. Oh, sorry, save it. And then I wanted to give this CSS class assigned to a button. Going back to Canvas and then click on my application button. I'm going to enter the CSS class name here so that it gets that styling from the CSS class I just built. I'm going to save it. So you can see that it already changed in the design. So I can run that application and see that it's also coming in runtime as well. So you can see that the button color changed to green as we put it in the CSS code. Well, that's all for today's session. I think I tried to cover some very basic, simple scripting examples in this first session, and then slowly we're going to cover some complex scripting as we go deeper into the application designer scenarios. In the next week, I'm going to bring some more examples, and then we can go through those examples in the system, and I'll get those examples pushed to GitHub so that you can download and practice for your own learning purpose. For detailed training on Analytics Cloud, SAP HANA Cloud, or S4 Embedded Analytics, you can reach out to me at sorompalli@gmail.com. Thank you.